So let me tell you what you're supposed to be getting so that you can think about how you're doing your preparation. So you're learning skeleton, which you did in the lab. In addition to learning skeleton, you're learning some key things about some key joints. So you're learning the bones and their processes. Then you're learning some stuff about joints. So last class period we did general joint movements and definitions of joints. So I can ask you about fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial joint characteristics. But you've also learned some details about the temporomandibular joint and the shoulder. So while we were moving down through the skeleton, I taught you the bones of the skull, the vertebral column, the sternum, the ribs. And then we looked at the shoulder and I said, let's wait now for just a minute. Let's look at the shoulder in more detail. So we talked about the shoulder in detail at that point. So we saw some of the muscles of the back. I haven't shown you any of the muscles of the chest. And you can see as we're going through this, I'm not going through and just reading to you all the attachments of these things. I have provided for you a handout online for the muscle attachments that you will need to know. So you're doing those. And I provided you with some extra slides last time to show you some of these attachments so that you'll have them, even though your book has them in glorious detail in tables. So what I'm going to do today, so you're doing bones and joints and muscle attachments. Now today, what I'm going to do, after we talk about a couple of muscles on the chest, just to sort of round out what I've done so far as we're moving down the body, I'm going to take another pause. So I did head, and then I did back. We looked at muscles, and I said, oh, let's talk about joints for a little while, and I did that. Showed you joint movements. Today, I'm just going to show you a couple of muscles on the chest so you have an idea about what's here. And then I'm going to pause again. This pause today is an item of extreme importance. It's a new chapter in your textbook. It's very difficult. And you know, the truth is, I never really do with this class what they deserve. I've had a few students who've taken the sophomore anatomy course, who've gone on to physical therapy school, and they tell me that they wish that we had done more of this in this class. But it doesn't fit everybody at the sophomore level. So I must warn you, I know that most of you probably don't care at this point in your life, but I must warn you that what you're about to learn today is very overview in its presentation. It's not detail. When you see it, you're going to think, oh my word. But what I'm going to tell you today is not detail. I'm just going to give you overview. So I will ask you, for those of you who go on to the PTA program here at the college, for those of you who go on to physical therapy school, I'll just ask you for your forgiveness at some point, because you will look back on this and you will say, I know because kids tell me, you will look back on this day and Monday, you will look back at me and you'll say, you could have been a lot more help to us if you would have given us all the details. But I have more to do with you. I don't have the time here to do it with you. So I like to start this class by apologizing. You don't want me to apologize because most of you just tell me what I need to know and I'll learn it. But as you get older, you realize that's not the way the world works. You need to learn it because you're going to have to know it. And so I'm going to do overview. You're going to pay attention as I go through this plexus information today, and you're going to get a sense of it. That way, in your life, whatever clinical training you do in your life, when you get to it, you'll look back at this and go, okay, at least the first 10 minutes of this class period I have heard before. And that's all I can do for you. I've said it, 2 or 3 times. If you want more, Louisiana College offers more, but you're going to have to take a junior or senior level course in the content. This class is not designed that way. Okay, so a couple muscles and then we'll start it. On the front, this is the pectoralis major. It's the superficial chest muscle on the front, kind of what the trapezius is to the back. And it has attachments to the sternum and the cartilages of the first 6 ribs, and the aponeurosis of the external oblique. These are attachments here to the sternum and the cartilages of the first 6 ribs, and then down here to the aponeurosis of the external oblique. Now, since I mentioned it here, and I don't have pictures to show you, and it's on your list, I believe, it may not be because its attachments are very detailed. I try to keep that as simple as possible. The external oblique is one of 4 abdominal muscles that we're not going to talk about in any detail for their attachments. However, I would like you to know about them, so I'd like to bring it up here at least. When I bring up the external oblique, I'd like to at least give you context for what I'm attaching this to. So this is the upper thorax right here. The abdominal cavity is covered by a muscle called the external oblique. And the aponeurosis, or the tendon sheath of the external oblique, actually fuses with the pectoralis major here. Now, the external oblique is one of 4 abdominal muscles that we will talk about in detail in the spring. But would you just make a list of them here for me? I'm going to list them for you, superficial to deep. And then we'll talk about their details and actions when we talk about how you breathe in the spring. They are superficial to deep, the external oblique. The next one is the internal oblique. That makes sense. It's the next one deep to it. External, internal. And then the third one, just before you get into the abdominal body cage, is the transverse abdominis. The transverse abdominis. The fourth of the abdominal muscles attaches to a couple of ribs here, and this xiphoid process and goes down to the pubic tubercle. It's called the rectus abdominis. So there's an external oblique, an internal oblique, a transverse abdominis, and right in the middle, there's a rectus abdominis. These are the 4 abdominal muscles that will help you do forced expiration. And we'll talk about them, as I said, in the spring. But I like to bring them up here when I mention the external oblique as an attachment for the pectoralis major. Otherwise, you have no context for that. Now, the attachment of the pec major is into the intertubercular groove. Some textbooks will call it the floor of the intertubercular groove. Some textbooks will say it attaches to the lateral margin of the bicipital groove. So there's all kinds of ways to say this. So I've worded it as simple as I can. It's at the intertubercular groove. Now, have you seen anything else there in this class? Why is the intertubercular groove important to you at this point in human anatomy? What did you see there? Is it important for the shoulder? Is that groove important for my shoulder?
Yes.
How so?
The long head of the bicep.
Good. So the long head of the bicep passes through that groove and attaches to the rim of the glenoid cavity. It is, in fact, one of the stabilizing features of the shoulder joint. So I just wanted you to think about, in context, what's going on here. That's where the long head of the bicep is, and it's also where the chest muscle hits, right there at the intertubercular groove. All right? Here's the deep muscle to the pectoralis major. This is the minor. This muscle has attachments to the ribs 3, 4, and 5, ribs 3 to 5, and to the coracoid process. It attaches to ribs 3, 4, and 5, and to the coracoid process. Now, this picture here shows you the pectoralis minor. But you can also see another attachment here to the coracoid process. Can you tell me what that is? You just told me.
The short.
Yeah, right. So what is this right here? That's the long head of the bicep passing up through the intertubercular groove between the greater and the lesser tubercle. This is the short head of the bicep. This is the attachment of the pectoralis minor. You see they share attachments here in the coracoid process. Now, I'm going to finish this shoulder stuff right here with this last observation. When we looked at the shoulder before, at the coracoid process, we said that the clavicle, this bone right here, is an extremely important bone in that it keeps the shoulder lateral. And I said that if you cut the clavicle here, that you can just take the shoulder and just pull it right over. It's the thing that holds it lateral. Now you've learned at this point all kinds of muscle attachments, things that stabilize the shoulder joint attached to the scapula, right? So we saw the deltoid, we saw the muscles of the rotator cuff, we talked about the bicep, we talked about the ligaments that are hanging on this thing. And so I like to finish this right here. So you see the pectoralis major here holding on to the scapula. I like to finish this by pointing out to the students on this image that the shoulder itself is kept lateral by a bone. The question remains, however, what keeps the shoulder from falling? So this is a very important observation right here. We're seeing the pec minor here. We're seeing the short of the bicep here. There's another muscle here that's just been cut off called the coracobrachialis. There are a lot of muscle and soft tissue attachments around here. The question is, if I can keep my shoulder out here with a bone so that it doesn't move this way, what keeps all this complex out here, this bone, the humerus is attached to the scapula, what keeps it from moving this way? Those are all soft tissues, right? What is holding the entire upper extremity in its location, where it is? Now you can think of some things that we have seen, right? For one thing, I have a soft tissue connection from the trapezius that goes to the spine and the occipital bone, right? So that helps to hold the scapula up. We also saw attached to the medial border of the scapula the levator. And the levator goes up to the cervical, the transverse processes of the cervical bones. That helps to hold the shoulder up. But those are soft tissues, right? And muscles tend to be able to expand and stretch and move, right? And so we have a lot of mobility on this joint, not only at the glenohumeral joint, but the scapula itself. We can protract and retract and depress and elevate and all these motions with this thing. You could argue that all of those attachments would leave all of us with sagging shoulders were it not for the attachment of the clavicle to the coracoid process. So it is shown here, it's actually a double ligament. You can see a part of it here and a part of it there. This ligament right here is called the coracoclavicular ligament. I showed it to you on the shoulder. And I said, look at this ligament right here. It is in fact not stabilizing the shoulder joint. It doesn't help keep the head of the humerus in the glenoid cavity. But that ligament right there is what hangs your pectoral girdle. So you could make the case, and I think it's well, I know it's correct, but I think it's a good case to be made, that the clavicle is the critical bone for the position of the pectoral girdle. As a bony attachment, it pushes the pectoral girdle lateral. As a ligamentous attachment to the coracoid process, it keeps the shoulder from sagging. This is the suspension, the tethered suspension of the shoulder. Right here where the pectoralis minor attaches, the clavicle also attaches. Now, for those of you who've done this in the lab, what is the name of that bony process of the clavicle? On the acromial end, on the inferior and posterior aspect of the clavicle, on the end out by my shoulder, there's a knot there. Does anybody remember its name? What's that?
I'm thinking wrong too.
So there's an attachment over on this side that attaches here to the first rib and the costal cartilage. We call this one the costal tuberosity. This one out here is called the conoid. C-O-N-O-I-D, the conoid tubercle. The conoid tubercle of the clavicle attaches to the coracoid. It is a suspension of the shoulder. Now, you can see that there's also a stabilizing one that attaches out here to the acromion, but this is the suspension ligament right here. Very important attachments. I like to finish there. We did the shoulder, finish with the pectoralis minor. Now, one more. This is the latissimus dorsi on the back, so there's your trapezius, and this will finish our discussion of front and back. This one has an indirect attachment to the spinous processes of T7 to L5, so it shares some of the trapezius attachments here, and the 10th through the 12th rib and the iliac crest. This one also attaches to the floor of the intertubercular groove. So, things at the intertubercular groove, yes? Things at the intertubercular groove. The long head of the bicep. The pectoralis major on the front. The latissimus dorsi on the back. All attached very close to one another on the proximal end of the humerus. So, the next time you're at the Healthplex and you sit down on the device where the bar is above you and you reach up to that bar and you're going to pull down on that bar by exercise like this. You're going to pull down on that bar. Look at the picture of the muscles that it says that exercise works. It will have a picture of the bicep. Yes? It'll have a picture of the bicep. And it will have a picture of the pectoralis major. And it will have a picture of the latissimus dorsi. Now, how is it possible that the bicep, the pectoralis major, and the latissimus dorsi are all worked by the same action, by pulling down with force from above your head? Because of the shared position of these muscle tendons at the intertubercular groove. Yeah. All right. Now, here's my shift. So for the rest of the class period today and part of the class on Monday, the gear shift has happened, and we are going to talk about how the nervous system makes muscles contract. Now, let me tell you how this is going to play out, all right? So this is going to be part of the finishing volley. I still have to show you the knees and talk about the leg muscles. Okay? Next Wednesday, I still have to do that. But between now and then, we're going to talk about the nervous system. This is my pause in the middle for the nervous system. So here's how this is going to play out. I am not going to teach you all of the information on these slides. The information that I will target for you out of the nervous system, I'm going to extract out of the nervous system the pieces of information that you need to explain how nerves make muscles contract. This will be the anatomical part of that story. So I want a student finishing sophomore level anatomy and physiology to be able to say, this is the pathway, the general pathway for the information that made muscles contract in different parts of my body. So I want you to be able to take the information from your brain down through the brain and the spinal cord, and then pick the right place in the spinal cord to leave the spinal cord and go out to the muscle. This is Miss Frizzle's journey. This is us getting on her bus and riding down the pathway to the muscle. I want you to have an anatomy description of how the information from your brain gets to your muscles. All right? So today and Monday. The second part then, after I finish Test 2's lecture material, which will be legs. After I finish that on Wednesday next week, the second part will be as we begin Test 3 material. That Test 3 material will be, okay, now I know how to get there. I can go on Ms. Frizzle's bus from my brain to the muscle. Now, what happens to make the muscle contract? So you're going to learn the anatomy pathway, Test 2. Test 3, you will learn the physiology, the mechanism. And the story there then will become nutrition and ATP generation and how proteins work together. We'll talk about all kinds of fun stuff for how muscles actually work, the physiology of the muscle. Test 2 is anatomy, 3 is the physiology. All right? So the story begins for muscle contraction in the brain, specifically in an area that we call the primary motor area. Now, this is an image of the brain's cortical regions, the outside part of the human brain. So we're not looking inside. We're looking at all the outside portions of the brain here. And you can see there are numbers all over the place here. And those numbers indicate functional areas of the cortex. The cortex meaning the outer part of the brain. These are areas where the number of cell bodies is very dense. So you might say this outer part of your brain, this outer part of the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex, contains the cells that run the body. Literally run the body. They are they are the areas of functional significance. And I will teach you, last test section of this class, we'll come back to this. And I'm going to teach you some more. You're going to know what the language centers are. You're going to know where the visual cortex and auditory and all that. We'll do that later. But for today, we want to talk about what parts of your brain make the muscles contract. And the place where you start is right here in an area called the primary motor area or the primary motor cortex. All right? Now notice, the brain itself is convoluted. It has hills and valleys on it. The hills on the brain we refer to singular as gyrus. G-Y-R-U-S. A hill is a gyrus. G-Y-R-U-S. A valley, as you can see labeled here, is a sulcus. S-U-L-C-U-S. And you can see in this picture that the primary motor cortex is in a gyrus just in front of a major valley called the central sulcus. And for that reason, your textbook is going to tell you that the primary motor area is in the precentral gyrus. So the primary motor cortex is in fact in the precentral gyrus, the hill just in front of the central sulcus. Now anatomically, where is that? Can you tell me, this image is sort of stretched here. Can you tell me what lobe of the brain is this? This is the frontal lobe. And what lobe is this? Parietal, okay? So where would this sulcus be then?
On the sutras.
It's somewhere close to the border of the frontal and parietal lobes of the brain. Now, is there a suture on top of your head that would get you close to that? What's it called? The coronal suture, yeah. So you're not far from the central sulcus at the coronal suture. Very near where the frontal becomes the parietal lobe. So I'm just telling you where this is located. This precentral gyrus is the primary motor area. Now, I'm going to take a knife and I'm going to cut a section through the brain like this. What kind of section is that? Frontal, sagittal, or transverse? Okay. All right, so let me do it this way. This is a lateral view. So my head is like this. Now I'm going to make a section like this. Okay, good. It's taking a bit. Sometimes I feel like I fail you. This is a coronal, right? A frontal section. Yes? You just told me about the coronal suture. This is a coronal section. All right. When I do that, I take a coronal section through here, and what I've done is show you the orientation, taking a coronal section through the brain here, and then after taking that section like this, the frontal section,